Ladies and gentlemen, wishing you a peaceful night full of rest and relaxation. Tonight we journey not just through history, but beneath it. You're standing at the edge of a vast golden ocean, the Sahara Desert. The night air is cool now, brushing against your skin like a silk scarf dipped in moonlight. There's no wind, just the faint shifting of distant dunes as they whisper to one another in languages older than pyramids. The stars hang overhead like lanterns, forgotten by time, and you take your first step into this immense sleeping sea. But the sand beneath your feet is not empty. Beneath it lie entire cities' streets where merchants once shouted prices homes, where fires once crackled with evening stews temples, where prayers once echoed into vaulted silence. Civilizations didn't always avoid this place. They built, they traded, they thrived. You probably wouldn't last a week out here, let's be honest, but thousands did, and they left behind more than just stories. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start walking your steps, sinking softly into the sand. With every movement, the hush of this ancient desert wraps tighter around you. There's a strange comfort here. The sky stretches wider than your thoughts, and in that vastness, your modern worries seem to vanish grain by grain. The Sahara was not always like this. No, if you could blink back 10,000 years, you'd find yourself up to your ankles in grass, not sand. Herds of elephants and giraffes roamed across lake shores. Rain soaked the plains in regular rhythm. Early humans carved pictures of this Eden onto the rocks, depictions of crocodiles, hippos, even people swimming. These weren't dreams. They were Tuesday afternoons. Historians still argue whether this green Sahara was a stable, long-term environment or a fleeting, cyclical phase. But one thing is certain, it was once lush enough to host not just animals and tribes, but towns, settlements, infrastructure. Now stand still for a moment. Feel the cool grit beneath your soles. The temperature is dropping further as the desert exhales its stored heat into the night. Off in the distance, you imagine the faint sound of water trickling. Perhaps the ghost of a riverbed, long dry. You turn toward it, following the sound or the idea of it as many before you once did. The shifting dunes around you are not just sand, they're burial mounds. Towns didn't always die with fire or war. Sometimes they were simply buried, swallowed one lazy gust at a time. What was once a bustling marketplace becomes a soft hill. A granary becomes a dune. A fortress tower becomes just a shadow beneath the moon. There are no fences or warning signs, no polite plaques, just the silence of a culture gone under, literally. And yet the signs remain if you look closely. A half-buried grinding stone, a line of darker sand where old walls once stood. The strange way the wind whirls in one place and not another, disturbed by shapes it can no longer see, but still remembers. You trudge onward and find a broken pot, smooth, simple, unglazed. Nothing fancy, nothing decorative, but it tells a story. Someone once bent over this clay, spinning it on a wheel with wet hands, just trying to store a little water or a few beans. Now it lies shattered in the dust, watching stars that didn't exist when it was whole. Here's a thought to cradle. As you settle in somewhere beneath these very dunes, there may be libraries. Literal ones. In certain forgotten towns, parchment or papyrus may still lie intact in sealed rooms, guarded from moisture and decay by the dryness of the sand. Entire languages, philosophies, or even recipes might be waiting for rediscovery. There's a popular theory that this part of the desert was once home to a network of towns, not unlike the Silk Roads in the east, connected by foot camel and trade winds, shared water wells, shifting alliances, a kind of sandy suburbia stretching for hundreds of miles. Still, archaeologists argue whether these were true cities in the modern sense or loosely connected communities. Were they permanent or seasonal, used only during certain reigns? Were they self-governing or tied to empires whose names we no longer know? Like so much in history, answers are blurry. But questions. Oh, those remain in perfect focus. You rest for a moment on a warm slab of stone half buried, but oddly flat. Maybe it was once a bench or a threshold. A small beetle scurries by, probably with no idea it just ran over someone's forgotten kitchen. You listen, not for sounds, but for the stories that linger in the atmosphere. The Sahara has no shortage of tales, only a shortage of listeners willing to slow down enough to hear them. That's you now. Here's your first little secret of the night deserts aren't dead. They're just quiet. They're patient. They hold on to everything. Bones, bricks, sandals, gossip. They keep it all safe under layers of sunburnt sand until the wind peels back just enough to remind us something once lived here. Something brilliant, ordinary, and utterly human. You stand again, brushing off your hands. The moon has shifted, casting long, sleepy shadows over the dunes. Somewhere ahead is the story of a forgotten kingdom. One whose people carved entire cities below ground to survive this dryness, but we'll get there soon. For now you take one more step into the silence, and the sand welcomes you like an old friend with secrets to tell. You walk deeper into the dunes, the world around you softly shifting from sandy emptiness to something richer, denser, with the feeling of things just out of reach. The stars overhead don't judge your curiosity. They've seen entire cities come and go beneath this sky. Now tilt your head slightly and imagine this green grass stretching all the way to the horizon. Not cacti, not sand, but thick savanna brush teeming with life. You're not hallucinating from the heat. You're just slipping back in time. Welcome to the Sahara 8,000 years ago. This isn't a quirky historical theory. It's a well-supported scientific fact. The Sahara used to be green, a lush, habitable region filled with lakes, rivers, forests, and yes, humans. They didn't just pass through, they built lives here. You aren't in the desert anymore. You're now in the middle of what was once a thriving ecosystem. Geologists call this period the African Humid Period. It started after the last ice age and lasted for several thousand years. Rainfall patterns shifted thanks to a wobble in the Earth's orbit and changes in monsoon dynamics. This green era transformed the Sahara into something almost unrecognizable, more like modern-day Kenya than the dry basin it is now. Imagine wading ankle-deep through wetlands, stepping around hippos. You see tall grasses brushing the sides of longhorn cattle. Nomads aren't wandering hopelessly here, they're herding, planting, carving out territory. It's quiet, yes, but not because nothing's happening. It's the kind of quiet that comes with routine, with evening fires, with the whirring of insects, and the occasional snort of a resting gazelle. Historians still argue whether permanent towns emerged during this time, or if most people remained semi-nomadic. But the presence of megalithic burial sites like those in Nabta Playa suggests long-term planning and social organization. You don't align stone circles with the stars unless you plan on sticking around. Ah yes, Nabta Playa. Picture this. It's 6,000 years ago, and you're walking through a shallow basin that fills with rainwater during the wet season. Around you are massive stone slabs arranged in a circle. Some are taller than you. They cast long shadows across the dusty plain. They track the solstices. They predict the floods. They may have even told time. Long before Stonehenge rose from the British fog, people here were already watching the sky. And it's not just stones. Archaeologists have uncovered pottery animal remains, even signs of early agriculture. These weren't just people waiting for the next rain, they were shaping their world, and perhaps even each other. But slowly, and then very suddenly in geological terms, everything changes. The rains fade. The earth tilts slightly again, as it always does, and the great monsoon belt retreats south. The grass dies, the rivers dry, and the people they scatter. Some follow the water toward the Nile Valley. Others push west, seeking refuge in the Sahel. Some may have tried to stay their footprints slowly covered over by the advancing sands. And here's where it gets strange. Those same deserts that erase their farms and drown their roads in silence are also what preserved their stories. Not in books, of course, but in the lines of rock art, the patterns in the soil, the stories that still travel on Tuareg winds. You pause beside a low ridge. A cluster of stones juts out from the sand, not a natural formation. You crouch, brush the surface. It's too smooth, too deliberate. Could it be the edge of an old wall, or maybe the mouth of a long, dry well? You smile. Welcome to amateur archaeology at its finest. Now here's your fringe tidbit of the night. Some researchers believe that this Sahara transformation wasn't entirely natural. There's an emerging theory that early human land use practices like overgrazing or fire-based agriculture may have hastened the desertification process. Imagine that. The very people who thrived in the Green Sahara might have accidentally helped turn it into the sandy ocean you're walking through now. Whoops. But again, this is a hot topic of debate. Climate cycles are complex beasts, and pinning a desert's creation on Stone Age goat herders is a bit of a reach. Still, the idea lingers in scholarly circles like a particularly well-preserved potsherd. And here's where you come in. You're not just listening, you're participating in something ancient. Right now, you're walking through stories no longer told in textbooks. You're stepping across a land that once fed thousands, perhaps millions. Their fingerprints may be gone, but their choices echo under your soles. As the wind shifts, you catch a faint scent, earthy, dry, and almost metallic. It's not much, just a breath of something old. Maybe it's a mirage. Or maybe you've just stepped over someone's long-buried hearth. The thought sends a pleasant chill down your spine. Or maybe that's just the desert playing with you again. You sit for a moment on a rock that feels too perfectly flat to be coincidence. Maybe it once held a cooking pot. Or maybe it was a seat. You look up. The stars remain unchanged, stubborn in their arrangement. But everything else has moved, shifted, drifted. And so you begin to understand the rhythm of this place, not in centuries, but in millennia. The Sahara doesn't erase, it edits. Slowly, patiently, one wind-blown line at a time. What was once a fertile green tapestry becomes a golden canvas, waiting for new footprints to start the story over again. But don't get too comfortable. The desert still moves. And what it once buried, it might reveal again. You rise slowly, brushing the sand from your palms. The moon has shifted overhead, casting new shadows across the landscape, long and lean like fingers reaching through time. You walk forward again, and with each soft step, the night deepens. Ahead, the dunes ripple like ocean waves, but in between them something catches your eye. A small rise that isn't quite natural. You veer toward it, curiosity tugging at your feet. Soon, you're standing at the edge of what appears to be a cluster of collapsed walls, their foundations barely peeking through the surface. You're walking into a ghost of a town. Welcome to the ruins of Germa, once the capital of the Garamantian Kingdom. A name that doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but oh, what a story it tells. Right here in the Fezzan region of modern-day Libya, some 2,000 years ago, the Garamantes built an oasis civilization that the Roman Empire itself couldn't ignore. You'd expect desert dwellers to be scattered, maybe a bit isolated. But the Garamantes ran a network of fortified towns. They were sophisticated, organized, and brace yourself masters of underground engineering. Yes, the real jaw-dropper here is their water system. In a place where rainfall is a distant memory, the Garamantes tapped into ancient fossil aquifers, building underground canals known as fogaras. Picture sloped tunnels bored beneath the ground stretching for miles, channeling water from deep underground sources straight into their fields and homes. You're literally standing above one now. Though the tunnel has long since collapsed, the idea still hums below your feet. Historians still argue whether they invented the Fogara system independently or borrowed the idea from Persian engineers. Either way, their execution was flawless. Some of these canals ran for 3 to 4 kilometers under the desert, dug with stone tools and unfathomable patience. You won't find that in your average city planning class. And this oasis wasn't just functional, it was thriving. At its peak, Germa had multi-room homes, workshops, public squares, and possibly even schools or temples. You'd be forgiven for assuming people out here just ate dates and watched the sand blow around. Not quite. The Garamantes grew wheat, barley, and olives. They used donkeys and carts. They imported luxury goods. Some records even suggest they practiced dentistry rudimentary, but enough to make you clench your jaw a little. But the real cherry on top, they were on Rome's radar. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder referred to the Garamantes as a very great nation, even if relations were, let's say, complicated. Rome tried to tame them, then gave up. The Garamantes were raiders, traders, and occasionally neighbors. They didn't conquer Rome, but they didn't bend the knee either. Kind of like the grumpy but resourceful neighbor who doesn't show up to the barbecue but always has the best tools. Now you pause again, brushing your fingertips over a stone fragment, half buried in the sand. It's not much, just a piece of sandstone, but it's curved, shaped, likely part of an old jar or cistern. It's not in a museum. It's not in a glass case. It's here, right where someone dropped it, maybe when they were startled, maybe when they laughed. The Garamantes also had written language Tifina, an early Berber script still used by Tuareg communities today. Sadly, not much of it survives in context, so we don't know the Garamantes' side of their story. Most of what we know comes from Roman texts, which, let's be honest, aren't exactly neutral Yelp reviews. You can almost hear the imperial grumbling, desert people inexplicably successful, no sense of decorum. Fringe historians have floated some bold ideas that the Garamantes were ancestors of sub-Saharan cultures, that they developed their own advanced science, that they mapped stars we haven't even named yet. While most of that leans more into hopeful speculation than peer-reviewed certainty, the truth remains impressive enough. They built and maintained a desert civilization for centuries, in one of the harshest environments on Earth. That's not fantasy, it's logistics, muscle, and ingenuity. Eventually, of course, it unraveled. The fogaras dried up, trade routes shifted, Rome weakened, and with it the flow of goods and ideas. Without water, no town can last forever, not even one as cunning as Germa. Now walk a bit farther and imagine the streets' narrow shaded alleyways built to trap cool air, children running barefoot with clay toys, merchants bartering over baskets of dried figs and salted fish brought in from caravan trails, the smell of oil lamps, the creak of leather sandals, the distant thump of a stone mill at work. All of it gone now, swept beneath this glittering surface, but not lost. Not really. The sand is memory. It's not a void, it's a veil. You take a seat on what might have once been a doorstep. The stone is warm from the sun's memory. You exhale slowly, letting the story settle into your bones. You're not just learning this, you're inhabiting it, letting the past wrap around you like a well-worn blanket. And, as the wind picks up, slightly rustling across the surface in little hisses, you wonder how many more towns like this still lie undiscovered. How many stories are still waiting just a few inches below the surface? Plenty, it turns out. The Sahara has layers, and we're just getting started. The desert is quiet again, but not in a lifeless way. It's the quiet of a room where something important just happened. You shake a bit of sand from your collar, and continue moving the soft crunch of your footsteps, swallowed by the dunes. Before long, the scenery changes. It's subtle at first, a shift in the color of the sand, a faint scent on the wind. Then you notice a darker layer in the soil beneath your feet, just below the surface. Ash, maybe. Charred remains of cooking fires, or the remnants of something even older. Now you're drifting southward in your imagination toward a cluster of dry valleys near the borderlands of present-day Mali and Niger. Welcome to the once flourishing region of Tadmeka, a name that once appeared on medieval maps alongside Timbuktu and Gao. But unlike those cities, Tadmeka didn't survive the centuries. It slipped beneath the sands quietly, like a candle being snuffed out. Historians still argue whether Tadmeka was a full-fledged city-state or more of a high-traffic caravan town. But what we do know is this: it was important. Traders knew it. Pilgrims passed through it. And gold, yes, real shimmering West African gold, flowed through its markets. Imagine the scene. It's the 10th century. You're trudging into Tadmeka behind a line of camels. You've just crossed a blistering stretch of desert. Your tongue is dry, your feet ache, and you smell like goat. But then relief. Shade. Dates soaked in honey. Cool water poured carefully from a ceramic jug. You've reached civilization. The people here are a blend Berber Arab and Black African. Their clothes shimmer with indigo dye, and their teeth flash gold when they smile. This isn't some dusty outpost. It's cosmopolitan, bustling, and deeply spiritual. Fringe researchers have pointed to early accounts that claim Tadmeka's inhabitants melted gold with salt instead of fire. A strange, probably symbolic idea that's never been replicated. Still, it tells you something. This was a place where wealth and ritual intertwined. One of the earliest references to Tadmeka comes from Ibn Hawqal, a 10th century Arab geographer. He describes it as a Muslim town that was like Mecca in its cleanliness. That may be a bit of poetic license, but it gives you a sense of pride and order. Streets swept, markets organized, a place of rest and religion. And speaking of religion, Tadmeka was also a stepping stone for pilgrims en route to Mecca. For many West Africans making the Hajj, this was their first real taste of Islamic architecture and culture. It was a checkpoint of transformation, both spiritual and physical. You pass what might once have been a mosque, just a cluster of raised stone outlines now. But imagine the call to prayer rising above the sound of haggling merchants and rustling tents. Picture the night fires burning low as travelers swap stories from Morocco, Egypt, or far-off Ghana, but then vanishing. Sometime between the 12th and 14th centuries, Tadmeka fades from written history. Trade patterns shift. The rise of larger cities like Timbuktu pulls traffic away. And slowly, inch by inch, the sand takes over, not with drama, just with time. Today, its remnants lie near the town of Essouk in Mali. Archaeologists have uncovered layers of ash pottery shards and ancient scripts scratched into stone. But much of it remains buried, a whisper beneath the surface. Now here's something quirky. Archaeologists digging in Tadmeka found evidence of what may have been a sophisticated smelting operation. Small clay furnaces, right there in the sand. They weren't just moving gold, they were processing it. Quietly, efficiently. A medieval version of a money laundering operation, perhaps, but with less paperwork and more camels. You pause at the edge of an old well. It's dry now, but you imagine a long, creaky pulley system, a teenager grumbling as he lowers the bucket, a woman scolding her children for playing too close. Life in its small and persistent forms. And here's the ironic bit. The town's name Tadmeka may have meant Mecca of the West. But like so many holy cities of old, it didn't need to survive physically to live on spiritually. Pilgrims passed through it, carried memories of it, and whispered its name in prayer and poetry for generations. Today, few have heard of Tadmeka. Its glory is buried, its streets erased. But for a few brief centuries, it stood like a lantern in the desert, welcoming, essential, then gone. You lean back, resting your spine against a wind-carved ridge, feeling the temperature drop as night deepens. You picture the flickering of lanterns in old Tadmeka. You imagine the chants, the songs, the late-night bargaining over the price of salt, or dates, or gold. The desert has no nostalgia. It simply waits. And one day, it will give up more of Tadmeka. Maybe a house, maybe a book, maybe a name carved into clay and left in the dark for centuries. For now, you keep walking. Your feet sink slightly with each step now. The dunes have softened the landscape, widening into a shallow basin. You glance at the stars overhead, bright, ancient, unchanged. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a jackal calls, once, then goes quiet again. You find yourself drifting westward into the reaches of what is now Mauritania. The terrain shifts from golden sands to gravel-strewn flats dotted with rocky outcrops. The air here feels stiller, as though holding its breath, and then you see it. Not ruins, not buildings, but something stranger, a swirling formation in the earth, vast and round, like the thumbprint of a sleeping god. The locals call it the Eye of the Sahara, but its older name is the Richat structure, and it has puzzled historians, geologists, and daydreamers for decades. At first glance, it seems natural, a geological dome 40 kilometers wide, its concentric rings the result of erosion over millions of years. But step closer, metaphorically of course, and questions begin to pile up. Is it just a natural feature? Or could this be the buried memory of a town, or even a civilization long forgotten? Historians still argue whether the Risha had any connection to human settlement, but here's where the whispers begin. Some claim that the site lines up with descriptions of Atlantis as described by Plato, a circular city with rings of land and water located beyond the Pillars of Hercules. That's the Strait of Gibraltar, for those playing along. Of course, mainstream scholars will raise an eyebrow at that. There's no definitive evidence that the Rishat structure was ever inhabited in a major way, but what if the Sahara wasn't always a desert? In the distant past, long before pharaohs and pyramids, it was a lush green savanna, rich with lakes, rivers, and thriving communities. Archaeological finds in the surrounding area suggest Neolithic occupation tools, bones, even fish hooks. Fish hooks in the Sahara. Let that image sit for a moment. You in the middle of this swirling geological mystery, imagining a prehistoric fisherman cursing his luck. The Risha may not have been a city, but could it have been a landmark, a sacred site, a meeting point for distant tribes drawn by its strange, perfect geometry? Fringe theorists have suggested it was used for astronomy, that its rings align with celestial movements. Others whisper that it was a natural amphitheater where rituals took place, music chanting, or even early forms of theater under the stars. And here's a fun fringe tidbit. Some 20th century explorers swore they saw patterns in the stone that looked carved giant petroglyphs, spirals, lines. Later surveys failed to confirm anything definitive. But isn't that always the case? The closer you look, the more the sand rearranges itself. You take a moment to sit on the edge of the structure, or at least in your mind you do. You're perched on a rock staring down into the world's biggest spiral, wondering what it all means. A geological fluke, a lost city, or something else entirely. Regardless, the surrounding region was home to people, real people whose names have been lost to time, but whose tools and bones remain. They hunted game, fished in now-vanished lakes, carved images of giraffes and elephants into stone. Giraffes in the Sahara. Yes, you're allowed to smile at that. One of the oldest known archaeological sites nearby is Awelul, a crater not far from the Risha, where stone tools have been found alongside evidence of ancient meteor impacts. Maybe the people here watch the skies for more than just weather. You rise again, dust your hands, and start walking the outermost ring of the eye. The ground beneath your feet is lined with quartzite and lava rock layered like a cake only the earth could bake. It's quiet, except for the wind curling around your ears. The wind you suspect knows all the stories. It just doesn't tell them in words. So maybe you won't find Atlantis here. No glittering city swallowed by waves. No gods or guardians. But you will find the proof of human wonder of people staring at this massive spiral and asking, just as you are, what is this place? And if that isn't history worth telling, what is? The night deepens around you now. You've circled the eye and returned to where you began. Nothing here shouts. It hums, low and steady, like a lullaby made of stone and time. You move on, but you'll carry the spiral with you, tucked in your memory like a coin in your pocket. Warm, mysterious, slightly magical. The air turns cooler as you press onward, the dunes rolling like velvet folds beneath your feet. You follow a faint memory of a caravan trail, one that once connected mighty trade cities and oases, now nothing more than a rumor in the sand. Soon you arrive at the ghost of another town, Jerma, deep in the Fezzan region of what's now southwestern Libya. This was once the capital of the Garamantes, a desert people whose name sounds like a magician's mispronunciation, but whose legacy is carved into the very bones of the Sahara. Today, the ruins of Jerma rise modestly crumbled walls, scattered pottery hints of once flourishing life. But if you could peel back the centuries, you'd see something far grander: multi-storied mud brick houses, bustling streets, and a remarkably advanced water system running silently beneath your feet. Yes, that's your historical fact for the night. The Garamantes engineered a complex network of fogaras, underground canals, and shafts that brought water from distant aquifers to sustain their desert kingdom. Imagine lying awake at night in Germa, listening to the quiet trickle of that hidden lifeline beneath your floorboards. While Rome was conquering the Mediterranean, the Garamantes were building cities in a sea of sand. Roman authors called them barbaric desert-dwelling troublemakers who attacked frontier posts with chariots. But that might just be ancient propaganda. After all, historians still argue whether the Garamantes were fearsome raiders or simply savvy traders with sharp wheels and sharper deals. You stroll past where the market would have been. Vendors shouting over the heat selling salt dates, perhaps a camel or two on a good day. Children darting between stalls, splashing water from ceramic pots. The usual clamor of commerce, but quieter now, softer, like the echo of laughter you only half remember. Here's your fringe tidbit. Some scholars believe the Garamantes were early adopters of writing, leaving behind inscriptions in the Tifinagh script, a Berber alphabet still used by Tuareg tribes today. Others say these symbols were purely decorative or maybe magical charms. Either way, their meaning drifts just out of reach like words from a half-remembered dream. Archaeologists have uncovered more than a dozen Garamantes settlements scattered across the region, each carefully placed near fogaras, surrounded by irrigated fields. Wheat, barley, even grapes may have grown here. Try picturing that vineyards in Libya. You chuckle softly, thinking of wine with notes of sun-blasted sand dune and strong camel. One of the most striking finds came from tombs burials filled with glass beads, Roman imports, and items from as far south as Lake Chad. Germa wasn't isolated. It was a hub, a connector between Mediterranean empires and sub-Saharan kingdoms. And yet, like so many desert civilizations, the Garamantes fell victim to the very thing they conquered: water. Their fogaras, brilliant as they were tapped into fossil aquifers that couldn't replenish. Over time, wells dried, fields turned brittle, and slowly, inevitably, people left. There's no grand disaster tale here, no conquest, no inferno, just silence. The kind of vanishing that doesn't make headlines, just footprints fading behind a departing caravan. But they left a mark. Even now, when drones fly over Fezzan's dunes, you can see the outlines of ancient fields, square plots etched faintly in the sand like scars. Memory made visible. You pause beside a crumbled wall, fingers brushing over sun-baked bricks. Were they stacked by slaves, artisans, neighbors, building together? Historians still debate the Garamantes' social structure. Some say they relied heavily on slave labor from captured tribes. Others suggest a more complex society with class mobility and intermarriage. You'll never know for sure, and maybe that's part of the magic. Germa holds its secrets close. You close your eyes and imagine a warm night in ancient Germa. A man recites poetry near a lantern. A woman weaves a basket while her child snoozes at her side. There's music, perhaps a flute or a drum beat soft enough to lull you to sleep. And beneath it all, the faint sound of water still flows. The desert's breath cools as you wander further. The landscape begins to change again, the hard edges of rock turning soft and dusty. You're walking into a more mysterious stretch now, one that carries with it the weight of both history and myth. Up ahead, you see the faint outline of an ancient fortress rising above the horizon. The kind of thing you'd almost expect to see in an old film about lost empires or a treasure hunter's dream. But this isn't fantasy, it's Thamud, an ancient civilization whose very existence was forgotten by time, then rediscovered like a buried secret. Thamud is wrapped in legend. In the Arabian Peninsula, there's a persistent myth about the Thamudians, a people so gifted at carving stone that they turned mountains into homes and shrines. Some say the Thamud were a race of giants. Others insist they were magicians, able to summon water from the stone, conjure storms, or speak to animals. Most historians, however, argue that the Thamud were simply early desert dwellers, tribes that thrived by carving their dwellings directly into rocky outcrops, much like the Nabateans at Petra. They lived around 2000 BCE to 500 CE, inhabiting the barren stretches of modern-day Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the northern parts of Oman. But you wouldn't know it by looking at the ruins. Today, you're surrounded by these towering sandstone cliffs. They stretch above you, carved with intricate designs, faded, but still somewhat discernible after thousands of years. These are the remnants of Thamud's architecture. Not houses, not grand temples, but petroglyphs with symbols and figures that seem to swirl into each other in a language lost to time. Historians still argue whether these carvings were religious ceremonial or simply the artistic expressions of a people living so closely with their surroundings. Some believe the motifs represent a reverence for the natural world, a way to make sense of a land that gave so little. Others suggest they tell stories or even offer a glimpse into the day-to-day life of the Thamudians. And here's something strange: buried deep within the Thamudic ruins are stones that appear to be carved water channels stretching for miles across the desert. It seems as though these people might have been even more attuned to their environment than we give them credit for. Could these waterworks have helped channel desert rains into reservoirs? Or was it some form of ritualistic worship, an effort to call the rain gods down from the heavens? Now, as you walk deeper into Thamud's ruins, imagine what it must have been like to live here. The air so dry, so harsh, the sun beating down like a relentless hammer. Yet, amidst all of this, they carve their homes into the very stone itself. Can you picture it? A family of Thamudians gathering in their carved cave dwelling, the flicker of oil lamps casting shadows on the walls, creating a warm, intimate circle within the cold, imposing rock. Perhaps that was the secret of their survival adaptation. Where others saw only inhospitable wilderness, the Thamud saw possibility. They tamed their world by carving it, shaping it to their needs. The stone, the land, it all became a canvas. And yet, despite all of their resourcefulness, the Thamud disappeared. They didn't fall to invading armies or sweeping plagues, no grand tragedy or momentous battle. They simply faded. Archaeologists can only speculate on why. Some believe they were victims of climate change, their water sources slowly drying up their once thriving civilization, crumbling like the stones they carved. Others argue that they fell into decline due to social upheaval, the once unified people splintering into factions, each too distracted by their own troubles to hold on to what had made them strong. The desert has swallowed much of their story, leaving behind only traces. But maybe that's what makes it all the more fascinating, how much we don't know. How much is hidden in these forgotten places, just waiting for someone to unearth it. You pause in the middle of the site, running your fingers along the smooth surface of a rock that might once have been a doorway. The desert hums around you, its winds a constant companion. In the distance, a bird flies low, gliding gracefully, just as it has for thousands of years. Thamud may be gone, but the stone remains, and as long as it does, their memory endures. The shapes and symbols carved into these cliffs, they're not just remnants of an ancient people, they are a whisper, a calling card from a time when the desert wasn't an enemy, but a partner. It's a partnership that has lasted millennia. And in these quiet, still moments, you might feel like you're on the edge of discovering something just as old, something that once known will never truly be forgotten. The desert continues to shift around you, and the weight of the past seems to grow heavier with each step. The sands stretch on a never-ending wave of golden dunes, but you press onward following a faint but persistent pull. You've left the legendary Tamud behind, but ahead lies another mystery, this time in the heart of what's now southern Algeria. Here you find yourself near the vast dry stretch of land called the Tassili Najer. The name itself means plateau of rivers, a poetic irony given that the place has been dry for thousands of years. But once upon a time, long before the Sahara became the hot, arid desert, we know today this plateau was a lush paradise. Rivers flowed through its valleys, wild animals roamed freely, and most fascinating of all human civilizations thrived here, carving their stories into the very walls of the plateau. The Tassili rock art, often referred to as one of the world's greatest treasures, is nothing short of remarkable. Here in the winding caves and rocky overhangs are over 15,000 paintings and engravings, some dating as far back as 12,000 BCE. These works offer a glimpse into the lives of the early Saharan people, their beliefs, their environment, and their struggles. These paintings aren't just decorative, they're snapshots of a world long gone. Historians still debate the purpose of these images. Were they meant to depict everyday life? Or were they ritualistic, meant to summon the gods? Or even to ensure a good harvest? Perhaps they were even a form of written language, a precursor to the scripts that would eventually arise in Mesopotamia and Egypt. One thing is clear, though: the people who created these paintings had a deep connection to the world around them. Among the hundreds of figures painted on the cliff walls, you see depictions of animals. Some you might expect like gazelles and cattle. But there are others that catch your eye, animals long extinct in the region like crocodiles and hippopotamuses. These creatures were once native to the rivers that flowed through the area. But as the climate changed and the Sahara dried up, these animals retreated, and the people's once bountiful environment became something else entirely. And then there's the strangest thing: you see giant human figures, taller than the others, with faces adorned with elaborate geometric designs. Some hold spears or shields, while others appear to be performing dances, their movements frozen in time. These images are unlike anything you've seen before, mysterious, haunting, almost otherworldly. The fringe theories swirl around these figures. Could they represent gods or extraterrestrials? Some have suggested these towering figures might even be symbolic of a long-lost race of giants, a belief shared by certain local legends. Historians argue, of course, that these are simply stylized depictions of rulers, heroes, or shamans, individuals so important to the community that their image was preserved in this immortal way. But let's leave the giants aside for now and focus on the stories these paintings tell. Imagine yourself standing in one of the caves, bathed in the dim light of a flickering oil lamp. The walls are alive with color, bright reds, yellows, and ochres that have somehow survived the passage of time. A crowd of people dances before you, each figure frozen in a moment of joy or reverence. Maybe they were celebrating the arrival of rain or the successful hunt of a large animal. Or perhaps, as some suggest, they were calling on spirits for protection, asking for help in an uncertain world. It's fascinating, isn't it? The continuity of human experience. Thousands of years separate you from these people. Yet their paintings communicate something deeply familiar, a desire for connection, a desire to be remembered. These people wanted their stories to be told, their lives to be honored. Even in the face of a changing world, they wanted their legacy to endure. And in a way, it has. You're standing here staring at their work, a living witness to a world that no longer exists. In the quiet of the Sahara, in this forgotten corner of the desert, their voices still echo. Maybe not as loud as they once did, but loud enough for you to hear, if only for a moment. Perhaps in some distant future, someone will stand where you stand now and think about your story. The whispers of time can be funny like that, don't you think? You linger a little longer by the rock paintings, running your hand gently over the stone, careful not to disturb the delicate patterns. In a world of change of time, erasing the past, these images offer a fragile but lasting reminder of the human spirit. A reminder that no matter how far the sands of time may shift, some part of us can endure. As you step away from the vibrant rock art of Tassili Najer, the desert seems to expand once more, pulling you further into its vastness. The air grows even more still, thick with the silence of centuries. The ground beneath your feet, a mixture of cracked earth and soft sand, seems to remember every footstep that ever passed through this arid landscape. Yet you can't shake the feeling that you're never truly alone in the desert. There are stories here, always waiting to be uncovered. Just ahead, you see another faint outline on the horizon, a dark smudge against the sea of sand. It looks like another ruin, but this one feels different. This one is Ubar, also known as the Atlantis of the Sands. It's a name that stirs something within you, a memory of old legends of treasures hidden beneath the desert's endless dunes of a once great city that vanished without a trace. Ubar's story is one of myth and mystery, a tale woven through ancient texts and the imagination of historians. According to legend, Ubar was a grand city filled with towering buildings, lush gardens, and streets lined with treasures. It was a city of immense wealth and prosperity, where merchants from all over the Arabian Peninsula gathered to trade frankincense, gold, and rare spices. But like the fabled Atlantis, it was said to have been swallowed by the sands, its people wiped from existence, and its location lost to the ages. The problem is, historians still can't agree on whether Ubar ever truly existed. Some believe it was a real city, possibly located somewhere along the Frankincense Trail, the ancient trade route that wound its way across the Arabian Peninsula. Others argue that Ubar was purely a myth, an allegorical story created by the ancients to warn of the dangers of hubris and greed. Despite the uncertainty surrounding Ubar's existence, there are those who believe they've found the remains of the lost city. In the 1990s, explorers and archaeologists discovered a site in Oman, deep in the Rub al-Khali, or empty quarter, that seemed to fit the description of Ubar. The ruins there, stone walls, ancient artifacts, and an elaborate system of water channels suggest that this might indeed be the place where Ubar once stood. Yet, like much of the desert's history, the true story remains elusive. There's something almost eerie about standing here, just outside what might be the lost city. The wind stirs the sands around you, carrying with it a whisper of an ancient past. What was it like here when Ubar was still a living, breathing city? Can you imagine walking along its markets, hearing the hum of conversation, the clink of metal, the fragrant smells of spices and incense in the air? You take a moment to let your imagination fill in the gaps. The desert, it seems, is full of these ghostly moments. Cities that once thrived and then faded into nothingness, their stories etched into the land but never fully understood. Historians still argue about what might have caused Ubar's downfall. Some believe that the city's wealth led to its ruin, that it was too rich, too powerful, and that its rulers grew complacent, ignoring the dangers of the shifting sands. Others suggest that the city's fate was more natural, a victim of changing climate patterns that dried up its water sources and made its trade routes impossible to navigate. But there's another theory, one that's more mystical and captivating. The idea that Ubar was destroyed by the wrath of God, a punishment for the arrogance of its people. This story, which is recounted in the Quran, tells of a city that was drowned in a single night, swallowed by the desert, as a divine retribution for its inhabitants' pride. As you stand here in this quiet, desolate place, it's hard not to be swept up by the magic of the story. The very idea of a city lost to time, hidden beneath the sands for eternity, there's something both tragic and beautiful about it. The desert, in its silent way, keeps secrets. And perhaps some of those secrets are best left undiscovered, like a dream you wake from too soon. You can't help but wonder if Ubar really did exist. What did it look like in its prime? Was it as grand as the legends claim, or was it like so many other lost cities, simply a small town? A humble trading post that grew over time, its reputation magnified by the stories told long after it was gone. You take a deep breath, the desert air filling your lungs. The stillness is profound, almost suffocating. But there's peace in it too. The world has its mysteries, and some of them are best left for the imagination to solve. Ubar, it seems, is one of those mysteries. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand, you start to make your way back, your footsteps soft against the earth. The desert has a way of drawing you in, of keeping you captivated with its endless secrets. But for now, Ubar remains just out of reach, a forgotten dream in the sands. The sun dips lower in the sky as you make your way through the ever-expanding desert, the sand shifting beneath your feet. As the landscape around you changes, it almost feels as though the desert itself is trying to lead you somewhere. You continue forward, curiosity growing with each step, until the world opens up once again, revealing a new set of ruins. This place, however, has a different aura. Unlike the hidden treasures and forgotten cities of old, this is a site that seems far more recent, a remnant of a world just beyond the horizon of history. This is the ancient city of Dakhla, a once thriving settlement in the Sahara Desert, now quietly entombed beneath the sands of southern Egypt. Dakhla was a part of a much older civilization that thrived at the edge of the Sahara, an oasis in the middle of a vast and unforgiving desert. Though smaller than some of the grander cities you've encountered in your journey, Dakhla was a key settlement for travelers and traders, crossing the vast stretches of the Sahara to reach the Mediterranean world. Dakhla is not as widely known as cities like Petra or Timbuktu, but its importance lies in its unique positioning along the ancient trade routes that connected Egypt to sub-Saharan Africa. The city prospered due to its access to water and its proximity to the trade networks that carried goods such as salt gold and precious metals from deeper within the continent. As you walk through the scattered remnants of the city, you notice that many of the structures are built from mud brick, a material that, though less durable than stone, still manages to tell the story of this desert city's long history. The mud brick houses, now reduced to little more than foundations and rubble, were once home to the people who thrived here. But in the midst of this seemingly ordinary settlement, there's a peculiar element that catches your eye. Scattered among the remains of homes and walls are numerous inscriptions carved into the stone. Some faded, some still sharp enough to make out. These inscriptions aren't just random markings or symbols. They are thought to be records of the Dakhla people's beliefs and traditions, and they tell of a culture that was deeply tied to the rhythms of the desert. The carvings show depictions of animals, some familiar like camels and gazelles, and others more curious like a mysterious serpent whose twisting form seems to represent an ancient deity or protector. Some historians believe these serpent motifs were part of a ritualistic religious practice tied to the desert's cyclical nature. It's said that the people of Dakhla worshipped a series of gods associated with natural forces, the sun, the moon, and the stars, and believed that their survival depended on pleasing these gods through regular offerings and ceremonies. The serpent, often depicted coiled around a figure, may have been a symbol of protection or wisdom. It's interesting to think about the role of these desert communities in the larger scope of Sahara history. Dakhla, for example, existed in relative isolation, but was still connected to the wider Mediterranean world through trade. The inhabitants of Dakhla had access to goods that were not available to other, more isolated desert communities, luxuries like textiles, fine pottery, and even ivory from deeper in Africa. This exchange of goods and perhaps ideas helped shape the way the people of Dakhla lived and thought. And yet, despite its position along such an important trade route, Dakhla eventually fell into decline. Historians still speculate about why this happened. Was it the desert's unforgiving nature gradually encroaching upon the city's oasis and reducing its access to water? Or was it the shifting tides of trade that moved away from the region, rendering once bustling cities like Dakhla irrelevant in the grander scheme of the ancient world? The most common theory, however, suggests that Dakhla's downfall was due to a series of external invasions. Around the 7th century CE, as the Arab expansion began to sweep across North Africa, many of the desert settlements like Dakhla were abandoned. The oasis trade routes that had once sustained these cities became increasingly dangerous to travel, and the rising tides of empire displaced local cultures and communities. Still, even with the sands of time wearing down its walls, Dakhla's legacy is far from forgotten. The inscriptions, the artifacts, and the stories buried here continue to offer a fascinating glimpse into a forgotten chapter of desert history. The people of Dakhla, just like the Taimud and the lost city of Ubar, are proof that no matter how harsh the desert, there is always something left behind, a memory, a story, a legacy that survives the passage of time. As you stand in the ruins, the wind picking up around you, you can almost imagine the city bustling with activity, the sound of traders haggling over spices, the laughter of children running through the alleyways, the creak of camel saddles as merchants prepare for their next journey. For a moment, the present seems to fall away, and you're transported to a time when Dakhla was a thriving oasis of life in the midst of the endless desert. And then as quickly as it came, the vision fades, leaving you once again in the present. But that connection to the past, to those people who lived here, lingers a little longer, as if the desert is whispering its secrets to you. The sun dips below the horizon, and the temperature begins to drop, the desert's cold night creeping in. The sand now feels less like an enemy, and more like a soft, comforting blanket, enveloping you in its stillness. Yet despite the tranquility of the desert night, something about this place continues to pull you deeper into its mysteries. You take a deep breath, the cool air filling your lungs, and begin to walk forward once more, following the invisible threads of ancient stories. This time, you find yourself wandering into a more unfamiliar territory, an area that once hosted one of the Sahara's most intriguing civilizations, the Garamantian Kingdom. The Garamantes, an ancient desert society that flourished in the southern part of Libya, were no strangers to the Sahara's harsh environment. In fact, their survival strategy was so effective that they managed to thrive here for nearly a millennium from the 5th century BCE to the 5th century CE. What's especially remarkable about the Garamantes is how they transformed the desert into an oasis of sorts. They didn't just endure the Sahara, they mastered it. The Garamantes are famous for developing an incredibly sophisticated system of underground irrigation tunnels, which they use to tap into underground aquifers and bring water to the surface. These tunnels, known as qanats, were an engineering marvel of the time and allowed the Garamantes to grow crops, sustain their livestock, and create thriving communities in the middle of an otherwise desolate landscape. As you wander through the remains of their civilization, you can almost feel the pulse of a once vibrant society. The ruins you see before you, stone structures that line the edge of the desert, were once bustling settlements full of traders, farmers, and craftsmen. The Garamantes were skilled at producing fine pottery metal tools and textiles, all of which were highly sought after by other civilizations in North Africa and the Mediterranean. Historians still debate how the Garamantes managed to build such an advanced society in such an unforgiving environment. Some argue that their success came from their ability to control and manipulate the environment itself using the qanat system to create a network of irrigation that sustained their cities and allowed agriculture to flourish. Others suggest that the Garamantes may have had access to ancient knowledge passed down from even earlier civilizations, knowledge lost to the sands of time. One fascinating theory suggests that the Garamantes had contact with other ancient cultures, possibly even the Egyptians or Phoenicians, and that this exchange of knowledge played a significant role in their development. Archaeological evidence shows that the Garamantes had trade links with other regions, and their pottery and artifacts bear similarities to those of the Egyptians, suggesting that they were not isolated from the rest of the ancient world. But despite their technological advancements and strategic positioning in the desert, the Garamantes ultimately fell into decline. By the 5th century CE, their civilization had all but vanished, and the reasons for their collapse remain a mystery. Some historians believe that the depletion of water sources in the region, combined with shifting trade routes, might have led to their downfall. Others suggest that the rise of external invaders, particularly the Byzantines, might have disrupted the Garamantes' ability to sustain their empire. And then there's the mystery of their disappearance. After a seemingly prosperous millennium, the Garamantes left behind nothing but ruins, and their knowledge of qanat irrigation was lost for centuries. It wasn't until much later that historians and archaeologists began to piece together the story of this once thriving civilization. Some suggest that the Garamantes may have simply integrated into neighboring cultures, their legacy absorbed into the greater fabric of North African history. Others, however, believe that their fall was more sudden, the result of a rapid environmental collapse that left their society unable to cope. As you stand among the ruins, you can't help but wonder about the Garamantes. What was life like for them living in this harsh, unforgiving landscape? How did they manage to dominate the Sahara for so long, and why did they eventually fade away? There's something hauntingly beautiful about their story, the idea of a people so deeply connected to their land their survival so intricately tied to the rhythms of the desert. It's a reminder that no matter how far we've come, the desert still holds on to its secrets. The evening sky above you darkens, and the stars begin to twinkle their light like tiny whispers of the past. In a way, they seem to be reminding you that this land, though harsh and unforgiving, has always been a place of stories. From the Garamantes to the ancient Egyptians to the forgotten traders of the Sahara, the desert has seen it all, and it keeps its memories hidden beneath the shifting sands. The wind picks up, sweeping across the ruins and carrying with it the scent of the dry earth. The silence of the desert is almost overwhelming, but it's a silence that feels oddly comforting, like the quiet hum of the world before it was shaped by the hustle of modern life. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the wind guide you into the desert's deep, timeless rhythm. And as you stand there in the heart of the Sahara, you realize something. The desert, for all its brutality, also carries within it a profound sense of peace. It's a place where history lies hidden, waiting to be discovered by those patient enough to seek it out. A place where the stories of ancient civilizations, of the Garamantes, of the Tamud, of the lost city of Ubar, can still be heard, if only you listen closely enough. The stillness of the desert envelops you once again, the only sound being the soft whisper of the wind. The land stretches before you, vast and seemingly endless, as you continue your journey through the forgotten corners of history. Each step you take into the deep sands of the Sahara feels like another step into a world that no longer exists, a world that for centuries has been swallowed up by time. But the stories of these lost towns, civilizations, and their people remain waiting for someone like you to bring them back to life. As you venture deeper, a new series of ruins catches your eye. These ones are different, larger, more imposing, their remnants standing stark against the desert sky. This is the city of Sijil Massa, once a thriving trading hub along the Saharan caravan routes. Today, it's little more than a ghostly shadow of its former self, but the history behind it is still very much alive. Sijil Massa was founded in the 8th century by the Berbers, a group of nomadic tribes who had mastered the art of survival in the harsh desert environment. Its location near the Ziz River in what is now Morocco made it an ideal spot for trade, and soon it became one of the most important commercial centers in North Africa. From here, goods like gold, salt, and ivory made their way across the desert to the Mediterranean world, and exotic spices, textiles, and other luxury items made their way back into the heart of the Sahara. The prosperity of Sijil Massa wasn't just built on trade alone, though. The city also became a center of Islamic scholarship and culture, attracting scholars, artists, and poets from across the Islamic world. Its mosques and madrasas were places where knowledge flourished, and the city became a melting pot of cultures and ideas. Travelers passing through would have marveled at the great gates and towering walls that protected this oasis city, all built using mud brick and adorned with intricate carvings and geometric designs. However, like many other desert cities, the story of Sijil Massa is one of eventual decline. Its once bustling markets grew quieter, its streets more empty. Historians believe that a series of attacks by Bedouin tribes in the 11th century, combined with the changing trade routes and the exhaustion of local resources, contributed to its eventual collapse. The city, once a thriving oasis of life and commerce, was slowly overtaken by the encroaching desert, its walls crumbling into the sand. Today, the ruins of Sijil Massa are a silent reminder of the transience of civilization. Some parts of the city have been buried completely, while others remain partially exposed offering a glimpse into the past. There's something haunting about standing in the midst of such ruins, knowing that a once vibrant hub of life is now just a shadow of its former self. Yet in that silence, there is also a sense of peace. The desert doesn't judge or remember, it simply accepts as it always has. It's interesting to note that Sijil Masa wasn't the only city to fall victim to the shifting tides of history. The region itself, known as the Tafilalt, was home to many other cities that rose and fell over the centuries, all built on the same principles of trade, religion, and survival. But Sijil Masa's story is particularly poignant because it represents a period in history when the Sahara was not a barrier, but rather a crossroads, a place where civilizations came together. Despite its decline, Sijil Masa's legacy didn't entirely fade away. Some of its knowledge and culture were absorbed into neighboring regions, and the Saharan trade routes continued to thrive, albeit in different forms. The desert, as always, remained a place of transition, where empires rose and fell, but where life itself endured in one form or another. As you stand in the ruins, the wind whispers through the empty streets, and you can almost hear the echoes of the past. The laughter of traders, the clatter of goods being unloaded, the hum of conversation in 1,000 different languages. For a moment, the city comes alive again, its streets full of people, moving through their daily lives. But just as quickly, the illusion fades, and you're left alone with the ruins once more, the silence as deep as the desert itself. Yet even in this silence, there's a certain tranquility. The ruins, the empty streets, the remnants of a civilization long gone. They all serve as a reminder that history, for all its complexity and chaos, is also a story of resilience. The people of Sijil Masa, like the countless other towns and cities, swallowed by the sands of time, fought to make their mark on the world. And even though they've been erased from the map, their stories live on in the memories of those who, like you, take the time to listen. The desert stretches out before you, and the journey continues. The past may be long gone, but it is never truly lost. It lingers beneath the surface of the sands, waiting for the next traveler to uncover it. As you continue your walk through the vast Sahara, the landscape around you changes once again. The desert stretches endlessly, but now in the distance you catch sight of something unexpected, a series of small stone structures half buried in the sand. They appear almost insignificant. At first, nothing more than weathered remnants of a forgotten past. But as you draw closer, the distinct shape of an ancient settlement begins to emerge. This is the lost city of Ubar, a place steeped in myth and legend, often referred to as the Atlantis of the Sands. For centuries, explorers and historians have been captivated by the idea of a city that, according to ancient texts, was once rich in gold and spices, only to disappear into the sands, swallowed whole by the desert. But did this fabled city truly exist, or is Ubar merely a figment of ancient imagination, a story passed down through the ages? The legend of Ubar dates back to ancient Arabian tales, most notably the Quran, and the works of Greek and Roman historians. According to these accounts, Ubar was a prosperous and luxurious city, described as the home of a wealthy and powerful king who ruled over vast trade networks. The city's riches were said to have come from the trade of frankincense, a precious resin used in religious rituals. The people of Ubar were said to have lived in splendor, their homes made of marble and precious stones, and their markets filled with exotic goods from all corners of the ancient world. But the most compelling part of the story is the city's sudden disappearance. According to the legends, Ubar was destroyed by a divine punishment, the result of the inhabitants' greed and moral corruption. In some versions of the story, the city was swallowed by a sandstorm, while in others, it was buried beneath a massive earthquake or flood. The details vary, but the common thread is clear: Ubar's downfall was swift and catastrophic. For centuries, explorers and treasure hunters have searched for the lost city, drawn by the promise of untold riches and the allure of uncovering an ancient mystery. But despite numerous expeditions, the location of Ubar remains a mystery. Some have speculated that the city was located in the Rub al-Khali, the vast desert in the Arabian Peninsula known as the Empty Quarter, while others believe it may have been somewhere in the eastern parts of Oman. In recent years, however, the search for Ubar has taken a new turn, with archaeologists and scientists turning to modern technology to solve the mystery. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar have been used to scan the desert for any signs of the lost city. Some believe that they may have found evidence of ancient settlements buried beneath the sand, offering a tantalizing glimpse into the past. Yet despite these technological advances, no definitive proof of Ubar's existence has been found. One intriguing theory suggests that Ubar may have been a real city, but not the luxurious metropolis described in the legends. Instead, it may have been a trading center, much like Sijil Masa, a place where merchants gathered to trade goods like frankincense and myrrh. This theory posits that the city's wealth and prosperity may have been exaggerated over time, turning it into the mythic city of gold and riches that has captured the imagination of so many. Historians still debate the existence of Ubar, with some dismissing it as a mere legend, while others continue to search for evidence that may one day prove the city's real existence. Whatever the truth may be, Ubar remains a symbol of the mysteries of the desert, a place where the boundary between myth and reality is blurred. It's a reminder that in the vast and unforgiving Sahara, even the smallest trace of civilization can become a legend, its story carried through the ages by those who seek to uncover the past. As you stand among the ruins, it's hard not to be drawn into the magic of the story. The desert around you seems to hum with energy, as though it's keeping its secrets hidden beneath the sands, waiting for the next traveler to stumble upon them. The wind picks up, carrying with it the scent of the desert, and for a moment you can almost hear the whispers of those ancient traders, their voices lost to time. The city of Ubar may be gone, but its story lives on, an enduring mystery that continues to captivate and intrigue. And yet the desert is, as it always has been, a place of quiet contemplation, where the lines between past and present blur into a timeless continuum. As you stand there in the heart of this vast, empty landscape, you realize that the real treasure of Ubar may not be gold or jewels, but the stories that continue to echo across the dunes. The search for the lost cities of the Sahara is far from over. In fact, it's just one chapter in a much larger tale, one that stretches across the centuries from the ancient world to the present day. And as long as there are explorers willing to search for the past, the desert will continue to hold its secrets, waiting to reveal them to those patient enough to listen. As you move on from the mysterious ruins of Ubar, the desert seems to stretch farther before you, an endless expanse of sand and silence. The sun is beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the landscape, and you can feel the air grow cooler with the onset of evening. Yet, as peaceful as it may seem, This tranquil landscape hides more than just shifting dunes. Beneath the surface of the desert lie the remnants of civilizations long forgotten, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered. Your next stop is a place that, while not as legendary as Ubar, carries a deep sense of intrigue. Tichit, an ancient settlement located in what is now southern Mauritania, is often overshadowed by its more famous counterparts, yet it holds its own unique place in the history of the Sahara. Though much of Tichit remains buried beneath the sands, the story of its rise and fall provides important insights into the history of human adaptation to the harsh desert environment. Tichit was once a thriving city founded around the 3rd century BCE, and it flourished for several centuries. What makes Tichit particularly fascinating is its role as one of the earliest centers of urbanization in the desert region. While many desert settlements were small transient trading posts, Tichit was different. It was a planned city with well-constructed walls, granaries, and complex residential areas, all built to withstand the harsh desert conditions. Archaeologists have uncovered impressive evidence of Tichit's advanced architecture, including stone-built houses and fortified walls. The city's most notable feature, however, is its intricate system of water management, which allowed the people of Tichit to thrive in an otherwise water-scarce environment. The desert may be unforgiving, but the people of Tichit found ways to adapt, creating wells, reservoirs, and channels to harness every drop of water that fell from the sky. But Tichit's story is not one of eternal prosperity. Like so many other ancient desert civilizations, the city eventually faced challenges that led to its decline. Scholars believe that a combination of environmental factors, including desertification and a drought that struck the region around the 4th century CE, caused the people of Tichit to abandon their once thriving city. The city's fate mirrors the larger pattern of civilizations in the Sahara, where prosperity and survival were always tied to the fickle forces of nature. What makes Tichit especially intriguing is that it is part of a much larger archaeological complex that spans the southern Sahara. Researchers have discovered numerous other settlements in the region, some of which may have been contemporaneous with Tichit, while others appear to have followed in its footsteps after the city's fall. These settlements suggest that the people of the Sahara were not isolated. They were part of a larger network of trade and cultural exchange that spanned the desert. Much like the cities of ancient Mesopotamia or the Nile Valley civilizations, the people of the Sahara were connected by a web of economic and social ties that transcended the boundaries of individual city-states. Historians still debate the precise reasons for Tichit's abandonment. Some argue that the drought and environmental changes were the primary cause, while others suggest that internal conflict or shifts in trade routes may have played a role. What is certain, however, is that Tichit's decline marks the end of an era of sophisticated urban life in the southern Sahara, and the city was eventually forgotten, buried beneath the sands. Despite this, the ruins of Tichit remain as a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of the people who once called it home. There is an intriguing theory that suggests Tichit wasn't just a city, but rather a spiritual center, possibly connected to the larger religious practices that once flourished in the Sahara. Some researchers have pointed to the presence of ceremonial objects and evidence of early religious rituals in the city's ruins, suggesting that Tichit may have played an important role in the religious life of the ancient Sahara. The idea of a lost spiritual center hidden away in the desert adds yet another layer of mystery to this already enigmatic city. Standing amidst the ruins of Tikrit, it's easy to get lost in thought. The desert's vast silence is almost meditative, and you can't help but wonder what life must have been like for the people who once lived here. Did they ever fear that their city would one day be lost to time, buried beneath the endless sands of the Sahara? Or did they live their lives with the knowledge that, like the desert itself, they were part of something much larger than themselves, a cycle of rise and fall that had been happening for millennia? The sands may have claimed the city of Tikrit, but its story is far from over. Like so many other lost towns and civilizations, Tikrit's legacy lives on in the people who continue to search for answers. Archaeologists, historians, and explorers still make pilgrimages to the Sahara in the hopes of uncovering more clues about the life that once flourished here. And with every discovery, a piece of the puzzle falls into place, revealing a deeper understanding of the complex history of human civilization in the desert. As you leave Tikrit behind, the desert once again envelops you its silence, punctuated only by the soft whisper of the wind. The story of this lost town is just one chapter in the larger saga of the Sahara, a story that continues to unfold one discovery at a time. The sun has now completely set, casting the Sahara in a soft twilight glow, where shadows grow long and the temperature drops ever so slightly. It's the perfect time to reflect on the incredible resilience of the desert's ancient inhabitants, who, despite the challenges of this harsh landscape, found ways to thrive. Your journey now takes you to another corner of the Sahara, where yet another forgotten town lies buried beneath the dunes. Al-Barka, a settlement whose existence has only recently been brought to light. Al-Barka, tucked away in the southern reaches of what is now Algeria, was once a bustling hub along ancient trade routes. Historians believe that this city, like many others scattered across the Sahara, thrived because of its strategic location connecting the Mediterranean world with the sub-Saharan regions. The settlement's importance was due in no small part to the camel caravans, which were the backbone of the Sahara's trade system. These caravans would have carried goods such as salt gold and spices across vast stretches of desert, and Al-Barka was a critical stop along this route. What makes Al-Barka particularly intriguing is how it's only recently been rediscovered after centuries of silence. This was a city lost to history for a long time, only spoken of in a few ancient texts and accounts of travelers. The settlement was buried under layers of sand, and for centuries, nothing more than a few tantalizing references in old maps hinted at its existence. However, thanks to modern archaeological methods and the persistent work of local historians, the site has been rediscovered, revealing a fascinating glimpse into a civilization that had long been forgotten. At its peak, Al-Barka was a thriving urban center with houses built from stone and adobe and walls adorned with intricate carvings. The most striking feature of the city, however, was its impressive water supply system, which included a network of cisterns and wells critical for survival in such an arid environment. The people of Al-Barka had perfected the art of water conservation, using techniques that allowed them to tap into underground water sources and ensure a reliable supply of water even during periods of drought. But like so many other towns in the Sahara, Al-Barka's fortunes would change. Historians are still unsure about the precise reason for its decline, but there are several plausible theories. One possibility is that a shift in the desert's climate played a major role. The Sahara, like many deserts, has gone through cycles of wetter and drier periods over millennia. At some point, Al-Barka may have been struck by a prolonged drought, which would have severely impacted its agriculture and water supply. This could have led to the abandonment of the settlement, as people fled to more fertile areas in search of food and water. Another theory suggests that the decline of Al-Barka was linked to the rise of new trade routes. As the Sahara trade network evolved, different towns and cities began to play more important roles, leaving once thriving settlements like Al-Barka in the dust. The advent of new technologies, such as the camel saddle, allowed for faster and more efficient travel across the desert. And with this change in transportation, older trade routes that passed through cities like Al-Barka began to lose their relevance. But despite these theories, the true reason for Al-Barka's fall remains elusive. Historians continue to argue over whether it was environmental changes, economic shifts, or some combination of factors that led to the settlement's abandonment. One thing, however, is certain: the city has left behind a remarkable legacy. Its artifacts, from pottery to coins, offer important clues about the lives of the people who once lived there, shedding light on their trade networks, cultural practices, and everyday life. It's fascinating to consider that Al-Barka, for all its importance in ancient times, was little more than a whisper on the wind until its rediscovery in the modern era. As you wander through the ruins, you begin to realize just how much of history lies hidden beneath the sands of the Sahara. For every lost town and forgotten civilization that has been rediscovered, there are countless others that have yet to be found. The rediscovery of Al-Barka is just one example of how the Sahara continues to reveal its secrets to those willing to dig beneath its surface. Despite its reputation as a harsh and inhospitable place, the desert is filled with clues to the past, each one waiting to be uncovered. With each new find, a more complete picture of the ancient Sahara comes into focus, reminding us that history is never truly lost. It's simply waiting for the right time to be found again. As the cool evening breeze sweeps across the ruins of Al-Barka, you can almost imagine the bustling marketplace once alive with the sounds of traders, the clatter of camels, and the scent of spices drifting through the air. The desert in its eternal stillness holds these memories close, safeguarding them until the day they are brought back into the light. Al-Barka may have been forgotten for centuries, but now, thanks to modern archaeology, its story is being told once more. It stands as a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of the people who once lived here, and a reminder that even the most remote corners of the world have their stories to share. The moon is now high in the sky, casting a silver glow over the sands. The desert, which once felt so vast and empty, now seems full of secrets, each one hidden beneath layers of time and earth. As the cool desert night settles in, you begin to imagine that the sands themselves may have been waiting for millennia to share these lost stories. Tonight, you'll find yourself visiting another enigmatic town of the Sahara, Tadrart Akakas, a place not just buried by time, but also by history itself. Tadrart Akakas is located deep within the Libyan Sahara, and though it might not have been a city in the traditional sense, it was certainly a place where human life flourished long before the modern world arrived. Unlike the other towns you've encountered on your journey, Tadrart Akakas is most famous for the incredible rock art that adorns its cliffs, making it a cultural and spiritual center rather than a mere settlement. The art in Tadrart Akakas is unlike anything else in the Sahara. Carved and painted into the rock faces of the region are images of humans, animals, and mythical creatures, each one telling a unique story from a time when the Sahara was much more hospitable. It is hard to imagine, but thousands of years ago, this part of the desert was a lush savanna with abundant rivers and wildlife. Cattle, hippopotamuses, and even elephants roamed the land, a far cry from the arid wasteland you see before you now. The rock art of Tadrart Akakos is thought to date back to between 12,000 and 4,000 years ago, a period when the Sahara was undergoing a dramatic climate shift. As the lush landscape began to dry up, the people who lived here adapted by creating artistic records of their world, preserving the memory of an environment that would soon vanish. The paintings and carvings, which depict everything from dancing figures to hunting scenes, give us a glimpse into the daily lives and spiritual beliefs of the ancient inhabitants of the Sahara. One of the most striking things about the art in Tadrart Akakos is its vividness. Though the desert's heat and sandstorms have worn down much of the rock, many of the paintings are still incredibly well preserved thanks to the unique climate of the region. The fact that these ancient works of art have survived for millennia is a testament to the skill and ingenuity of the people who created them. Some of the images even include elaborate depictions of rituals and ceremonies, suggesting that the people of the Sahara held a deep connection to the natural world and the forces that governed it. Historians still argue about the meaning of the rock art. Some suggest that the images were created for ritualistic purposes, perhaps to invoke favorable weather or ensure a successful hunt. Others believe the paintings were a form of storytelling, passing down myths and legends from one generation to the next. It's also possible that the art had a more practical purpose, helping people navigate the desert or marking important sacred sites. One thing is certain: the art of Tadrart Akakos provides a rare window into the minds of the ancient Sahara's inhabitants, offering a glimpse into a time when the desert was not a barren wasteland, but a land full of life and possibility. As you wander through the desert today, the art of Tadrart Akakos remains a reminder that the Sahara was once a place of rich cultural and spiritual significance. The people who lived here did not simply survive, they created. They painted and carved their stories into the rocks, ensuring that even if the landscape itself changed, their memory would endure. It's almost as if the paintings themselves are inviting you to come closer to understand their world, their beliefs, and their way of life. The rock art of Tadrart Akakos is not the only evidence of human life in the area. The region also contains archaeological remains of ancient settlements, tools, and pottery, all of which suggest that the people who lived here were not isolated but part of a larger network of cultures across the Sahara and beyond. These people were connected by trade, by migration, and by a shared understanding of how to live in one of the harshest environments on Earth. It's difficult to overstate just how much Tadrart Akakos has to offer. While it might not be a lost city in the traditional sense, it is certainly a lost world, one that can only be pieced together through the careful study of its art and artifacts. In many ways, Tadrart Akakos feels like an ongoing conversation between the ancient and modern worlds, a reminder that history is never truly lost. It is simply waiting to be rediscovered. Standing in front of one of the rock paintings, you can almost feel the presence of the people who created it. Their world, so different from yours, was once vibrant with life, a stark contrast to the quiet desert that surrounds you now. As the moonlight reflects off the rocks, you can almost hear the faint sounds of ancient voices echoing through the air, telling stories that have been passed down through the ages. Tadrart Akakos may have been buried by time and sand, but it is far from forgotten. Its art, its history, and its people continue to inspire awe and wonder. And as you leave this place behind, you can't help but wonder how much more of the Sahara still holds within it the echoes of civilizations long gone. The cool desert breeze brushes across your face as you move through the night, tracing the path left by countless travelers who once passed through the Sahara's shifting dunes. Tonight you'll journey to yet another hidden corner of this vast desert. This time to explore the Mazab Valley, a site that not only represents the enduring spirit of the Saharan people, but also holds the key to understanding how life persisted in such a hostile environment. The Mazab Valley, located in what is now Algeria, is a region steeped in history, one that blends the ancient and the modern. It's home to the Ibadi Muslim community, a group that, despite the challenges of the desert, has flourished here for centuries. What's truly fascinating about Mazab is the way its people have managed to adapt to their environment, creating an oasis of life in the middle of an unforgiving landscape. At the heart of the Mazab Valley is a group of 5 fortified towns, each one built with remarkable architectural precision and a deep understanding of the desert's harsh conditions. The towns of the valley Gardaya, Malika, Biryane El Atuf, and Buanan were designed not just for defense but for sustainability in a land where water is precious and the sun beats down relentlessly. These towns are isolated, yes, but they are not cut off from the world. Over the centuries, they have served as important centers of trade and religious learning, with a rich culture that blends the teachings of Islam with the practical realities of desert life. The construction of the towns in Mazab is a remarkable feat of engineering. The architecture is distinctive, with whitewashed buildings that reflect the sun's harsh rays, keeping the interiors cool during the intense heat of the day. The narrow streets, designed to maximize shade, wind their way through the towns, leading to the mosques and markets that form the center of life in Mazab. Each town is built around a central oasis, where water from underground wells is used to irrigate fields and provide for the community. In a land where water is the key to survival, the people of Mazab have developed a sophisticated system of water management that allows them to make the most of every drop. Wells and cisterns collect rainwater, while a series of underground canals transport water from the oases to the farms. This system, known as the Ketaras, is one of the oldest and most efficient methods of water distribution in the world. It's a testament to the ingenuity of the Mazab people, who have learned to thrive in a place that seems inhospitable to all but the most determined. But the history of Mazab is not without its struggles. The people of the valley have faced countless challenges over the centuries, from external invaders to the shifting political landscape of North Africa. Despite these obstacles, the Ibadi Muslims of Mazab have managed to maintain their unique cultural and religious identity. They have been able to do so because of their strong sense of community and their deep-rooted connection to the land. The towns of Mazab are more than just physical spaces. They are spiritual sanctuaries, places where the values of self-sufficiency and resilience are passed down from one generation to the next. The region's isolation and resilience have allowed it to maintain a way of life that has persisted for centuries, even in the face of political upheaval and economic hardship. The people of Mazab are fiercely proud of their heritage, and their traditions continue to shape the way they live today. The architecture, the water management systems, and the communal values of Mazab stand as a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Yet historians still argue whether the success of the Mazab Valley towns was purely due to the resourcefulness of their inhabitants, or whether it was the geographical isolation of the region that played the greatest role in preserving the communities here. Some suggest that the distance from major trade routes and centers of political power helped protect the area from outside influences, while others point to the ingenuity of the Mazab people, whose innovations in architecture and water management allowed them to thrive even in a harsh environment. While there's no definitive answer to this debate, what is clear is that Mazab remains one of the most fascinating examples of how human beings can adapt to even the harshest environments. It's a place where the past and present coexist, where ancient traditions continue to shape the future, and where the people have found a way to live in harmony with the desert. As you sit on the edge of the valley looking out over the sweeping dunes and the faint glow of the town's lights in the distance, you can't help but marvel at how this desert oasis has managed to survive for so long. The Mazab Valley is a living example of how history and culture can persist even in the most unforgiving of landscapes. It's a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary stories are found in the least expected places. The towns of Mazab, with their timeless architecture and water systems, have become symbols of resilience in the Sahara. Despite the many challenges they've faced, these towns have stood the test of time, continuing to thrive as they have for centuries. And as the cool desert night settles in, you can feel the sense of peace and continuity that pervades this ancient land, where the echoes of the past still resonate in the present. As the night deepens and the desert grows still, your journey leads you to another incredible chapter in the Sahara's story. This time, it's not about the towns themselves, but about the mysterious empires that once ruled this vast region and then vanished without a trace. Welcome to the world of the Garamantes, a people who once thrived in the heart of the desert, leaving behind only a scattering of ruins and an inexplicable disappearance. The Garamantes were an ancient civilization that lived in what is now southern Libya, deep in the desert's heart. They are thought to have flourished between the 5th century BCE and the 5th century CE. What makes the Garamantes particularly fascinating, and what sets them apart from other ancient desert civilizations, is their ability to build a thriving society in the Sahara, where many others would have simply perished. The Garamantes not only survived the harsh desert conditions, but also prospered in a way that has continued to baffle historians. At the height of their civilization, the Garamantes were far from isolated. They created an extensive network of trade routes linking the Mediterranean world with sub-Saharan Africa. Their empire stretched across the vast desert and into the fertile lands of the Nile Valley. But it wasn't just their trade that made them remarkable, it was their remarkable engineering feats and their innovative use of the desert's resources. One of the most impressive aspects of Garamantian society was their mastery of irrigation. The Garamantes built an extensive system of underground canals known as qanats, which allowed them to channel water from distant sources and bring it to their cities and farms. This water system, much like the Qataras of the Mazab Valley, was critical to their survival in such a dry region. In fact, it's said that the Garamantes could cultivate crops like olives and grapes, which would have been unimaginable for most desert-dwelling societies. But despite their technological innovations and their success in adapting to the Sahara's harsh environment, the Garamantes eventually vanished. Historians still argue over the reasons for their disappearance. Some suggest that climatic change may have been a factor as the region's environment began to shift over time, making it harder to sustain their way of life. Others believe that the collapse of trade routes may have weakened the Garamantes' economic power, leading to their decline. Some even theorize that outside invasions, possibly from the Romans or Berbers, could have played a role in their downfall. What's particularly fascinating about the Garamantes is that, unlike many other ancient civilizations, they left behind very few written records. Most of what we know about them comes from the ruins of their cities, the artifacts they left behind, and the accounts of other ancient cultures like the Greeks and Romans. The ruins of Garamantian cities like Germa and Gadams provide tantalizing glimpses into their once thriving civilization, with their fortified walls, temples, and elaborate tombs. Yet despite this, there is still so much that remains a mystery. What exactly caused their sudden disappearance, and why did their culture leave behind so little in the way of written records? The Garamantes were a deeply organized society with an intricate system of governance and religion, but we may never fully understand what happened to them. Was it their isolation in the desert that left them vulnerable, or were they simply outpaced by the changing tides of history? The ruins they left behind serve as a haunting reminder of a civilization that was once a dominant force in the Sahara, and perhaps a subtle warning that even the most powerful of empires can disappear into the sands of time. As you stand before the remnants of the Garamantian cities, it's hard not to feel the weight of their disappearance. The desert which once cradled their thriving culture now holds their story in silence. There are no voices, no written records, only the whispers of the wind that move through the ruins. The buildings that once stood proud are now nothing more than stone skeletons, reminders of a people who mastered the desert, but ultimately became its victims. Though the Garamantes are no longer with us, their legacy remains. They were pioneers in desert living, their irrigation systems an early answer to the age-old question of how to survive in such a harsh environment. Their trade routes helped to connect distant civilizations, and their cities once stood as bustling centers of culture and commerce. In many ways, the Garamantes represent the fleeting nature of all civilizations, no matter how powerful or advanced they may seem. They built their cities in the heart of the Sahara, but the desert, ever-changing and relentless, slowly reclaimed them. Historians still debate the final fate of the Garamantes, and maybe that's the beauty of their story. It remains a mystery. In the end, we may never know exactly why they vanished, but perhaps that's the point. The desert itself, with its endless sands, holds its own secrets, and some of them may never be revealed. As the moon rises higher in the sky, you are left to contemplate the enduring mystery of the Garamantes and their empire. The desert, vast and silent, continues to guard its secrets, but for now, their story has been shared with you. And with it comes the understanding that, like the Garamantes, all things, no matter how mighty, will eventually fade into the sands of time. As the evening sky deepens to black, the whispers of the desert grow louder. With the moon casting its pale light over the dunes, tonight's journey leads us into a time when the Sahara was not just a place of survival, but a thriving crossroads of ancient trade. This is the story of the trans-Saharan trade routes, the lifeblood of civilizations that spanned from the heart of Africa all the way to the Mediterranean, connecting cultures, goods, and ideas across vast distances. But like so many great stories of trade and prosperity, it comes with an ironic twist. the great routes eventually faded into memory, swallowed up by the very desert they helped forge. The Sahara's most well-known trade routes began around the 7th century CE, when Islamic traders ventured south from the Mediterranean coast, seeking gold, ivory, and slaves as well as salt, a crucial resource for life in the desert. But the Saharan trade had roots that predate this period, going back to when the Nubians, Berbers, and pharaohs of Egypt had already established complex networks that crossed the desert's vast emptiness. But what did these trade routes look like? Imagine yourself standing on the edge of the desert. To the north lies the great Mediterranean world with its bustling ports and cities, and to the south stretches the deep, mysterious heart of Africa, where kingdoms like Ghana and Mali flourished in their wealth and knowledge. Between these two worlds lay the trans-Saharan routes, stretching like veins across the desert, alive with the movement of people, goods, and ideas. The Berbers, nomadic desert dwellers, were the primary guides of the caravan routes. They were the link between Africa's interior and the Mediterranean coast, traveling with enormous caravans of camels, sometimes numbering in the hundreds or even thousands. Their most famous trade partner was the mighty Empire of Mali, which was built upon the wealth that flowed from its rich gold mines. As the caravans snaked their way through the desert, they carried gold, ivory, and salt, all vital commodities for both sides of the Sahara. Gold from the rich mines of West Africa was highly sought after by the Mediterranean world, and salt, while abundant in the desert, was a luxury for those living along the coast. These goods helped the Mali Empire, in particular, grow into one of the wealthiest and most powerful kingdoms of the medieval world. But trade was not just about gold and salt. The caravans also transported knowledge and culture. The desert in many ways acted as a melting pot, where ideas from the Arab world, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa collided and blended. One of the greatest exchanges that took place was the spread of Islam, which found its way across the desert, carried by merchants, scholars, and travelers. As Islam spread through the region, the Saharan trade routes became not only economic arteries, but also conduits of religion, language, and culture. Historians still argue over the exact role of Islam in the rise of the Saharan trade. Some suggest that it was the religion's unifying influence that allowed the trade routes to flourish, providing a common language and shared cultural identity that spanned vast territories. Others point out that the trade routes were already thriving well before Islam's arrival, and its influence was just one factor among many in the development of the Saharan networks. The routes weren't just about trade goods. They were about the human connection they facilitated. The Saharan caravanserais, or rest stops, scattered across the desert, acted as both places of commerce and of cultural exchange. They were like small oases where merchants could rest, replenish their supplies, and share stories and ideas. These caravanserais became bustling hubs of knowledge and innovation, where Arabic scholars and African merchants mingled shared wisdom and debated philosophy. This exchange of ideas was as important as the trade itself. And yet, despite the tremendous success of these trade routes, they too eventually succumbed to the forces of nature and history. As the desert continued to shift and expand, the routes became increasingly difficult to navigate. The rise of the Atlantic slave trade in the 16th century also diverted attention and resources from the Sahara's ancient trade routes. With the coming of European colonialism and the opening of sea routes to Africa, the once thriving trans-Saharan trade slowly dwindled. Still, It's hard not to feel a sense of wonder when thinking about the grandeur of those caravan journeys of merchants trekking through a desert that seemed endless, yet somehow led to cities filled with riches and culture. Can you imagine yourself as one of those travelers, slowly making your way through the sand dunes with the rhythmic footsteps of camels around you, the air heavy with the scent of spices and salt? The promise of gold and adventure just over the horizon. Historians still debate how the shifting sands of time erase these ancient routes from the map. Did they simply fade away as the world changed, or was it a deliberate neglect that led to their abandonment? Whatever the reason, the trans-Saharan trade routes remain an incredible example of how people, even in the most challenging environments, find ways to connect trade and build legacies that last for centuries. And as you sit by the edge of the desert tonight, gazing out at the wide horizon, it's easy to imagine what those routes once looked like. Bustling caravans laden with goods and promises moving across the Sahara's vast expanse, leaving behind stories that would continue to echo across time. As the final chapter of tonight's journey unfolds, the shifting sands of time begin to settle, and with them we come to the mystery of the lost towns buried beneath the Sahara's relentless expanse. This is where the silence of the desert speaks the loudest, as the once thriving communities that once dotted its surface are now little more than forgotten whispers beneath the sand. The towns we are about to uncover may never have been famous in their time, but their stories offer us the deepest echoes of the Sahara's past, a reminder that no matter how small or obscure, all places are important. The forgotten towns of the Sahara are not just remnants of human habitation, but symbols of the region's changing environment. Long before the desert expanded to its current vastness, the Sahara was once a lush green landscape, teeming with life. These lost towns were built during what is known as the Green Sahara period, when the climate of the region was much more temperate and vast lake systems and river valleys supported flourishing human societies. The people who inhabited these towns, mysterious and largely unknown, left no written records of their existence. What we know about them comes primarily from archaeological digs, the patterns of ancient settlements that now lie beneath the sands. One of the most intriguing examples of these lost towns is Ouan Muhugiag, an ancient Berber settlement located in the northern reaches of the Sahara, in what is now Libya. The town, which dates back to around 1000 BCE, was a bustling hub for trade and agriculture. Archaeologists have found evidence of agricultural terraces, animal bones, and pottery, indicating that the people of Ouan Muhugiag were skilled in both farming and craftsmanship. The town was ideally located near ancient caravan trade routes, which allowed it to thrive for centuries before eventually being swallowed by the desert. The precise cause of the town's abandonment is still a subject of debate. Some historians believe that the gradual desiccation of the region led to the loss of the fertile land that sustained the town, while others argue that it was the shifting trade routes that brought its decline. Historians still argue about the role of the climate. Could the changing Sahara have been a slow, silent killer, forcing the people of Ouan Muhugiag to abandon their homes and migrate to other, more hospitable lands? Or was there something more mysterious at play? Perhaps a shift in political power or a tribal conflict that forced the town to collapse. Just as we can never be certain about the ultimate fate of Ouan Muhugiag, so too can we only guess at the reasons why other towns met similar fates. Tadrart Akakus, another once thriving settlement in southern Libya, was home to stunning rock art. and signs of early agriculture. Yet, like many of the desert's ancient towns, it too was abandoned, leaving us only with the haunting echoes of its past. And then there is the case of Jerma, one of the largest and most important towns of the ancient Garamantes, a city that once flourished as a center of trade, politics, and culture. Located in what is now southern Libya, Jerma was renowned for its architectural marvels, including its fortifications and paved streets. But despite its impressive stature, the city eventually fell silent, its ruins now barely distinguishable among the shifting dunes. Each of these lost towns, though now buried beneath the desert sands, holds the story of a people who were resilient in their efforts to live and thrive in a hostile environment. While historians still debate the reasons for their decline, one thing is certain: the sands of the Sahara have a way of hiding stories that are never fully told. The desert may claim the physical remnants of these places, but the memories of those who lived there remain, carried by the whispers of the wind that stir the sands. In many ways, these lost towns remind us that history is never truly gone. The bones of their cities, though covered by the desert's relentless waves of sand, still speak to those who are willing to listen. The stories of Uan Mahugiag Tadrart Kakas and Jerma are a testament to the endurance of human spirit, to the ability of communities to adapt, grow, and flourish, even in the most challenging environments. And so as the moon rises higher in the sky and the desert grows quieter, you can almost hear the echoes of these lost towns, the sounds of footsteps on ancient streets, the murmur of conversations in marketplaces, the clink of trade goods being exchanged, and the rustle of the wind through abandoned homes. The Sahara may have swallowed these towns, but in the stillness of the night, their memories remain. The desert, for all its power and mystery, can never fully erase the stories of those who once called it home. Now, as you prepare to drift off into sleep, perhaps you can imagine what it might have been like to walk those streets, to stand in the shadow of a once thriving city, now lost to time. The Sahara's silence is not an end, it is a beginning. The story of each lost town is just another chapter in the endless book that the desert continues to write.